Now we'll try and see if we get... That is exactly what I was hoping to finally get. For today's video, we're going to be putting the newly released Claude Sonnet 4.5 using Claude Code head-to-head against OpenAI's GPT-5 Codex High model using OpenAI's Codex command line agentic coding thing. So this is going to be a more technical and intricate video because we're essentially going to give these two a task, which is actually to create something that is inspired by one of my favorite games, which is something called Terrep 2 right here, or Deformers. It was made in 1996, and it was a soft body physics and very interesting driving simulator that was a technical demo, which did actually end up becoming something called Insane, which is a video game from the year 2000, and the body and soft body physics deformation of this game that is now 25 plus years old is something that almost still would rival BeamNG Drive, obviously a precursor to it, but it was extremely impressive for the time. And the whole point of today's test is going to be to try to replicate a tech demo like Terrep 2 using C++. Now, obviously that is going to be a more technically difficult task than perhaps what these models are used to being tested with. So once that's done, we're going to actually go ahead and give them the same task, but ask them to do it using HTML, JS, and CSS, just to see some of the differences we notice both in the way they can implement things and the level of difficulty across different types of languages. So with that, we're going to start by taking a look at the prompt, and feel free to subscribe, and then we'll jump into a technical but nice little coding video. And we can see right here that I won't read it through verbosely, but perhaps some folks will have a better understanding of this than others, but we're asking for a game akin to this to be made in C++ with soft body physics, some simple vehicle deformation, and an off-road track. And we're asking for every single file and associated piece to be generated as well. That will basically allow us to go ahead and run this as a program with the least amount of human work possible. Now, obviously, a lot of coding for these models probably falls within like more web stuff, but I want to give them a test in a language that I know people probably use in more hardcore scenarios, and I figure it may be interesting. So with that, we're basically just going to go ahead and paste this prompt into both of these. I will verify that, okay, so Claude has thinking on, and I am using Sonnet 4.5, and GPT-5 Codex is set to high. So with that, let's just press enter in both of these, and we'll basically see what happens. It seems they're both beginning by just making some project scaffolding or just architecting out the actual folder structure and file structure. Claude has actually gone ahead and seemingly much quicker actually generated the initial file that it is going to ask me to approve, and I'm going to just allow it to auto-approve everything in this session as, one, it's like a burner computer, so I don't care what these things do, they can run wild, but two, it will just kind of streamline the ability to allow this to run smoothly. We can see that, okay, so Codex is designing C++ mass spring, and then I was too slow to actually read the remainder of that sentence, and we can see that Claude is just going ahead and writing perhaps some graphic libraries or shaders or something of the sort. Now I do see a lot. Okay, so this is like some fairly verbose feedback we're seeing from Codex. This is a big step where I'm planning the whole project structure. All right, well, as long as you do it well, I'm okay with whatever you want to do. So not too much to say, I suppose. We can just kind of fast forward and see how these do. I am very excited to see if we do get some positive results. I had tested these two with the previous version, so Claude Opus 4.1, and I asked them to make like a bare metal USB driver for a Raspberry Pi Pico, and that may have been a little on the extreme side, so I wanted something between that and the browser-based operating system, and being that I do very much love that style of game, I figured this would be a reasonable test to perform. Now, both are making references, of course, of soft body physics with mass spring physics as well, so it would just be kind of interesting. And of course, this actually kind of relies on some level of assumption that these models do have understanding of what that Terrep 2 or Deformers game demonstration was. I would bet very heavily that they both are aware of that or have some level of knowledge that will allow them to use that as inspiration for their final generated result. And we can see the thinking as well in the Claude result here. So this is just showing a detailed transcript, and it says Control O to toggle. Now it said to toggle thinking you can do this, but this essentially just seems to, okay, thinking, good, now creating terrain H, thinking, now creating this with procedural ground and obstacles. So this gives us a little more verbose insight into what's actually occurring here, but I am going to go ahead and just turn that back off now so we can see a more top level overview of what it's doing. It does seem like the Codex result is close to finishing, as it is seemingly good, and it's actually autonomously testing the command to actually compile this program so we can actually run it. Again, I'm not like hyper well versed in the C ecosystem, so keep that in mind when watching this, but that is kind of why I wanted to test it this way and make these do most of the work, to have someone who is perhaps hobbyist level with this language go ahead and actually be able to successfully run and compile the result. Something to note just first and foremost is in terms of the actual readmes that were generated alongside the results here, the one that Claude made is far more intricate, to the point where it actually does give us some additional tasks to do, assuming that we are on a different distribution of Linux. So it even says for other distributions, and here's how you would go ahead and do this. And you can just see, based on the sheer number of lines that are in here, it is more verbose and fully featured than the ChatGPT or Codex, GPT Codex. I'm probably going to misname that the whole video. So here's the one that GPT had kind of made. So it is much more simple and utilitarian, I suppose, where the Claude one was definitely far more intricate. But again, this is more of a secondary consideration to the actual quality of the generated scripts or game. Now, unfortunately, when following Claude's instructions, we did receive an error when actually just trying to build this result. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that here into the code. There's like so many different names for all of these things. I oftentimes get tripped up when trying to name one. I will paste that here into Claude Code. Now, while Claude is doing, I'm not 100% sure what exactly it's doing here. I'm just going to go ahead and give Codex the actual error that I received when trying to run the make command from within the files it had generated. And okay, so the issue here is that it was not actually allowing me to install that dependency. And this is just me trying to use these to fix every single thing that pops up here without like just doing a Google or something that one would traditionally perhaps do when receiving that specific error. Claude is saying that it has fixed whatever the issue was, and it is now... Okay, so hypothetically, we should actually be able to go ahead and try this right now. So we'll do that. Okay, not entirely good. I will say here, the actual terrain that was drawn is not bad. It does have proper off-roadness to it. However, this is a far cry, truthfully, from what I had anticipated. Now, it is perhaps possible that this was a ask that is perhaps outside the scope of still what these are capable of doing. However, I don't think that to be the case. So now that we actually have a result that was able to build, compile, and did actually run on the system here, though perhaps not the best, and we see there was some level of physics here with the actual, I suppose call that a vehicle, interacting with the terrain. Unfortunately, none of the movement works, and the vehicle does not really have a vehicular shape to it. So this is so far the better result, based on the fact that it actually did fix the compilation issues and go ahead and actually open and run on the system. So I'm interested to see now, before we move them further, we'll try the GPT one, whatever it decides to do to actually fix the issues we were getting, and then we'll see like what level we're at there, and then perhaps move into a stage 2. And basically shortly after, it seems like Codex has now gone ahead and found itself to a place in which we will be able to now run this. So okay, they both did successfully now actually get past the issues they had. So what is the yes, okay, let's see how this... Oh, all right, well, so they both did successfully implement something that successfully opens and attempts to draw some form of something. I do believe the issue we're seeing here is that the actual ground terrain is not being drawn. So I think these would almost be artifacts, not artifacts, but like rocks or something on an off-road map. So both of them did properly adhere to the R being the reset button, and that's kind of what just gets this to go back in. And the ChatGPT, the Codex one, is actually responding to the WASD keys to actually move this vehicle. Unfortunately, this is essentially the extent of the quality of either of these results. They are both quite in a needs work state, so we're gonna maybe go ahead and now give them some feedback. So I have just gone ahead and summed up the issues that either of these are facing, both slightly a bit different, and I'm just going ahead and pasting them in now, giving them not only a description of the issues, but essentially a hit list of things that specifically need to be fixed to properly remedy the issues. I will say, and this is something that I truly don't have enough experience with to definitively be able to make a statement on, but I was very disappointed by the lack of actually drawing anything that at all resembled a vehicle. I don't believe it should be that difficult just based off of some of the capabilities as well as what we're allowing these to use. So that was kind of disappointing. Even sometimes when doing a browser-based testing where I ask them for a 3D racing game using JS, HTML, and CSS, the cars don't necessarily look super vehicular, but they do have the basic shape of a vehicle. So I think that was kind of lost among these. So I'll be interested to see what improvements get made and to what level. For cylindrical wheels, we should have a cargo bed and a cabin. And these are the things that hypothetically it would have gone ahead and fixed, which of course are just basically making the game work. So let's go ahead and see if it actually works properly. So far, yes. It's still kind of falling through the terrain, but we are actually able to move around. Oh, okay, that's not good. We need to maybe go back. All right, let's reset. And I will say this is a definite improvement in everything I asked for. This does look more like a vehicle. It actually does stay on the terrain. It's still kind of sinking into it, but part of that could just be the way we're actually seeing it. It's possible that the ground mesh of this vehicle is drawn where it's actually going. So actually, the more I see, it's just kind of hard to see some of the divots in the terrain, but it is actually working. Now, I'm not really able to actually turn, so that is definitely one downside I'm noticing here. And in addition to that, I don't unfortunately see anything that I can crash into, which would test the deformation of the vehicle. I just wish there was a obstacle to hit to actually see if the deformation does work, and if so, to what degree. Okay, so we've now gone into space. We can... All right. Well, being that actually did kind of finish first and semi-work, I'm going to now ask it for a couple simple improvements. So I'm just telling Claude to go ahead and make the steering a little sharper, perhaps fix how we can drive off the map, and put in an obstacle so we can test the actual deformation of this. And I'm being prompted, how is Claude doing in the session? Let's say it's doing fine. I do believe we are about to get our additional iterated result from Claude here, while keeping in mind that we're still waiting for the first round of improvements from Codex. However, oh, okay, we're getting closer there in Codex as well, but Claude has finished first once more. All right, so let's see. How is our steering? Our steering is significantly better. Now, all right, I think we've gone, there does seem to be some change to the camera here. Oh wow, okay, so those are attempts at obstacles. Maybe not. So it does seem like we're just driving through those. This is an improvement from the previous result in that the steering is better. However, that is kind of really the only thing I'm going to be able to say about it. We have a completed Codex job. Okay, so apparently that didn't make a difference. Very frustrating because I'm potentially seeing potential here, but sadly, this is just still rather messed up. It did fix a bit of the oddity with the car body, and this did have working movement on first try. The soft body physics, we're getting some level of rebounding when we actually hit one of these obstacles, but again, the big issue here is just, it's almost kind of like the same exact issue that I would have to give it. Codex has finished, and we're going to just go ahead and try once more. Now we'll try and see if we get... That is exactly what I was hoping to finally get. Now, this looks like somewhat of a buggy. The ground is finally... I was going to swear. The ground is finally drawn. Let's see if the movement works. It does. All right. I mean, this is... The turning is perhaps extremely aggressive, but overall, this is definitely in line with what I was hoping to receive, and we can see the soft body physics of the vehicle. Now, I don't really expect to get any deformation here just based off the fact that it's really quite difficult to actually get the darn thing to go fast enough to hit something at any measurable level of speed without having the weird snap turn incident or issue. But just the way it's actually... Regrettably, I can't actually move the camera around or anything, but this is far more in line with what I was kind of hoping to receive here. And you can just see the way the car is actually so fluid and wiggly. It is kind of, this is what I was hoping to get. So let's see if we can do a side-by-side here. All right, so here's both our results side by side. Obviously, I think I would have to say eventually the Codex result worked a little better. However, I think the terrain in the Claude one is better. The car model in Codex is better, but I think Claude's terrain, just in the way that it actually has peaks and valleys, is more realistic to what I had asked for in the way the car actually does properly follow the terrain. I do believe the car model and perhaps some of the actual soft body physics in the Codex implementation are significantly better, because if we just swap over to this one here, you can see that although perhaps it is far, I mean, the car's like Jello, but that is closer to what we needed, as it actually is more fitting of that Terrap 2 or Deformers tech demo. So this is very interesting, I have to say. And I would assume if you're still watching the video at this point, you would also have that same thing to say. I don't know that I can really give a definitive judgment on which one would be a clear winner here, considering the fact that Claude worked not only much quicker, but it fixed its issues much faster, and it ultimately gave us a functional result in a much quicker amount of time. And the actual like map here and things like that are better. So, but I do like the style of this one. Perhaps it's a bit dark, the Codex one, but overall, it's harder to quantify results like this than it is like a web browser OS, obviously, because this is far more subjective and there are many more variables here. But overall, I'm quite pleased that they both actually did successfully get functional things here running, and it was actually quite fun to be able to work in this manner with them. Now, out of sheer curiosity, just because I'd like to see how the results differ in terms of quality, I'm asking them the same exact thing, but instead of making them use C++, we're going to allow them to use HTML, JS, and CSS. I would imagine this to first and foremost happen much quicker. In addition to that, I would be rather surprised if neither of these managed to produce a semi-functional result upon first try. So this should obviously be something that happens quicker. I do apologize if I've neglected to properly expand these coding windows, and don't get confused, but Claude Code is now on the left-hand pane and Codex is now on the right-hand pane. I do have thinking enabled, and we are using Sonnet 4.5, of course, being that that is the newest model, and Codex seems to be significantly slower. Claude finished first, so we're just going to go ahead and open this in Chrome and see how our result is. Oh. Well, hey, R is to reset. Okay, that is somewhat frustrating, as it initially seemed like initially that was awesome, but it then just goes a bit haywire. Okay, well, supposedly Sonnet 4.5 has fixed it by just culminating that by saying the car should now drive smoothly without exploding. All right, I'll be the judge of that, Claude. Okay, it's still kind of exploding, but it's better. Interesting though, it's almost having the same issue it had when we did this in C++, where it kind of sinks down into the terrain, but you can definitely see a realistic example of the actual soft body physics here and the capability of like the springs. So you see the way it almost seems like the springs are far too weak or something of the sort. I can't really hypothesize on that. Okay, Codex did just finish as I gave Claude its third iteration now to go ahead and try to make this functional. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first result here from GPT Codex. Oh, oh. This is quite depressing. I mean, okay, the body deformation did work. I know that may be rather odd, but see how it goes from a rectangle to a less rectangular rectangle when we hit something. So there are, it's funny, these both really had similar bugs in their implementations regardless of what language we had them go ahead and actually use to make this prompt. So I can almost basically recycle most of my feedback for Codex here. Basically, this will be the last chance I give these models. So we'll go ahead and try the Claude one right here, where hopefully if it just adjusted some of the spring force or something like that, the car won't sink down into the ground now. Okay, well, it just, that is not right. It's so frustrating because I really want this to work. I mean, the terrain looks awesome. This is going to be Claude's last chance at fixing this issue, and unfortunately, it's just not quite able to grasp the balance between drivability and jitteriness, which is a shame because this result showed a lot of promise. The graphical style looks really good, but this is its fourth try now, so I unfortunately am going to have to call this one. So after 12 minutes, we have a newly created GPT result, a Codex result, and that is definitely more impressive. And this is quite in line with the Terrap or Deformers 2 demonstration that I'd really kind of hoped this would look like. There we have the soft body physics deformation. This is probably the best result I received across all 4 separate tests, just in terms of the actual kind of, maybe I'm just enamored with the way it's drawing the triangles, which is a distinct possibility because it is kind of still like going through the floor and things like that. But just the way that the deformation actually happens here when we crash into something, and this almost looks like an orange Cybertruck maybe, but that is good. That is actually, I like this. This is kind of, all right. Well, I mean, I guess I don't have too much else to say. Again, it's very difficult to quantify these results because of all the different factors here. If you ask me, well, Bijan, I want you to, in one sentence, kind of sum up what you truly believe based off of these tests, I would say I think that Claude Sonnet 4.5 is significantly better at UI and making things pretty, but I think that this specific Codex GPT-5 model with high thinking or whatever it's called is probably better at math. That would be my honest assessment based off of this. But Sonnet is not the big dog model. That would be Opus. So again, I would say it performed quite impressively considering that it is not necessarily supposed to be the top dog model of Anthropic's offerings. It just does happen to be the newest, most recently updated one. So with that, that is probably going to conclude what is a bit of a different and more technical video than my norm. But I do want to just occasionally do things like this because I know there are a lot of different interests of folks who watch these videos. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. And thanks for watching.